three very eminent speakers, including Manzoor Bhai's opening remarks. So the house rule is please keep your questions short. Even if you want to put a statement, let the statement be, a kind of a question rather than a speech. So the more we have, we can let the three speakers come back and respond. If you have a particular person to address the question, please do mention. But when you begin, please do introduce yourself. And just for your information, the whole event is being live streamed as we speak. So the floor is open. Yes, Munir, go ahead. Yeah, there is a mic. No, mic is there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Asif Munir. I work as a rights activist. I'll straight go to the questions, and perhaps this is to the two legal experts, but feel free for others as well. Just being a devil's advocate, because as we live stream, I'm sure Myanmar and their allies are also watching this and strategizing as well. What if the crime is committed in no man's land or neutral border territories, whether it's in terms of territorial jurisdiction, whether it's coercion, threat to life, what happens then? The other question is, can Myanmar file a petition against any kind of investigation or persecution in the name of state sovereignty? Thank you.
Ambassador Munshi, please. The mic.
Thank you, Professor Imtiaz. I have two questions. Number one is, of course, they all come out of my ignorance. I'm Munshi Faiz Ahmad, Chairman BIISS, Bangladesh Institute of International Strategic Studies. So the questions are, of course, born out of my ignorance, basically. But we know that the UN has, a few years ago, decided on this provision for a right to protection, R2P. Does that in any way give the ICC another avenue for jurisdiction in this regard? That is a question that, because I do not know, I ask. The other one is that came to my mind when I was listening to Honorable Philip Radok, MP, about the Chinese interest in this matter and BRI being the crux of the Chinese interest, as he was suggesting. But I wonder, whatever happens today and once these issues are resolved, China will continue to be China, India and Russia, they will all continue to be important to Myanmar, whichever regime is there. So why should these countries feel that their interests are threatened if they are taking the current regime to task? Thank you.
Can we have one or two more before we come back to the panel? Anyone? Yeah, please. Introduce yourself and just wait for the mic. Just wait for the mic is there. Yeah.
I'll hold on to it.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Barrister Mahfuzur Rahman Milon. I am Advocate Supreme Court of Bangladesh and Executive Director of Justice House Foundation. We all know about mass killing of Rohingya people. So far I know that mass killing is still not being officially termed as genocide by United Nations. Rather, it is being termed as ethnic cleansing. My question is, why still now that mass killing is not officially being known or termed as genocide by United Nations? Thank you.
Let's go for one more and then we come back to the panel. Anyone from the back? Yes, please. Yeah, the mic.
Thank you to the honorable speakers for such informative presentations. I'm Takbir Huda. I'm a research specialist at Bangladesh Legal Aid and Services Trust. I actually have two questions. The first is a rather generic question that may be answered by any of the panelists, and it is, what specific role can NGOs like BLAST play to build up the momentum in terms of building accountability of the actors with regards to the Rohingya crisis. Mr. Radak mentioned documentation. So is there anything more that we could do, or is there anything specific? Do we just record witness statements, or we are open to your suggestions? And secondly, it's a legal question, and it is to what extent does the Bemba case help us with regard to the gender-based violence that are taking place in Myanmar with regards to the rape, a genocidal rape of Rohingya women. I was actually referred to this case by Ms. Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. So I would want to know, because I believe this is the first case where the ICC recognized rape as a crime against humanity. It was against the former rebel militia leader, Jean-Pierre. So, thank you.
Ambassador Tariq Karim, the mic, please.
Tariq Karim, I'm a retired diplomat, now with the BRAC University. I have one comment and one question. My comment is, particularly having listened to all the distinguished speakers, that Bangladesh as a responsible member of the international community has a duty to uphold and further strengthen the regime of international law for crimes against humanity. We have ourselves conducted it because we, what I've described as the original sin, did not address the crimes against humanity in 71. My question is, what if for any reason Bangladesh fails to meet the deadline of responding to the ICC? What will be the cost? And perhaps the distinguished panels can address that. Thank you.
Thank you. One more and then we come back to the panel. Brigadier Shakwat.
Thank you very much. I'm retired Brigadier Sakhawat Hussain. Just follow up the Ambassador Karim's statement. What are the implications that Bangladesh may have if it responds positively to the ICC? Perhaps Imtiaz will be able to tell it. How much Bangladesh would lose in international arena, or its diplomatic or financial matter, like countries like China, Japan, India, Russia, how they would take it. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with Pastor Rifat. Rifat, you want to go first to respond? Can you bring a mic, one of the mic, please? Yeah. And then we go to Kate. Yeah.
Can I pick the questions
Please.
randomly?
Please.
Yes. I'm grateful that the issue of R2P has been raised, and it figures happily prominently in the Dhaka Declaration. And what it says, the Dhaka Declaration says, is that recognizing the concept of responsibility to protect R2P that obliges the international community to protect refugees through multi-pronged interventions aimed inter alia at deterring occurrences of egregious international crimes like genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, and at holding the offending state to account. The Dhaka Declaration, which was the product of a two-day conference, I think there was a consensus arrived at that, at least in theory and within the permits of the law and international declaration, there are no barriers or there are no impediments to an affected state like Bangladesh operating on two levels in tandem. Trying to achieve a resolution to a crisis through diplomatic means, while at the same time invoking the international community's duty under the circumstances to extend protection, not only at seeking a durable solution to the plight of the refugees, but at the same time, if need be, pursuing a judicial settlement of the dispute. So in theory, that is permissible under international law. Barrister Mahfuzur Rahman Milan, he said, why aren't we using the genocide word? The very concept of R2P is based on an understanding that in certain cases, a particular state will abdicate its responsibility to protect its own citizens within its own borders by resorting to egregious crimes and violence. And specifically, there is reference to the G word, genocide. And we've come to recognize that at the earlier forum in April. And R2P recognizes that it is specifically because of these crimes being committed that the burden of protecting victims of genocide and other heinous crimes, egregious crimes, to shift compulsorily, mandatorily to the international community. So the G word is being used. There was a question from Blast, what could be done with regard to the NGOs putting in their worth in the effort at documentation. I take you again to the Dhaka Declaration, and there at, I think, Declaration number 15, I think, point 15, there is mention of supporting the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar with regard to the Special Rapporteur's recommendation to establish a documentation structure to collect, map, and preserve evidence of human rights violations and abuses and testimony from refugees in Cox's Bazar, and call upon the UN General Assembly to implement the recommendation. On a personal note, our guest of honor referred to his experience in visiting the refugee camps in Hong Kong when thousands of Indo-Chinese refugees all over Southeast Asia were part of a comprehensive plan of action in seeking a durable solution to their plight. And part of the comprehensive plan of action was the role of the UNHCR that was recognized exceptionally by states all around the region to engage in status determination of the individuals as refugees or not. And it was through that process that effective oral and documentary evidence was collected of the sustained continuous level of persecution of individuals in Vietnam. We may not, at this point in time, want to go into the mechanism of status determination, but we can take a leaf from the UNHCR's experience as to how to collect this information by making it clear to our constituents, as it were, the refugees here, that it's being collected for a purpose, to probably to facilitate their return in safety and dignity, and also to hold Myanmar accountable. I leave it at that.
Kate?
Thank you. I'm kind of glad someone asked the no man's land question, but also scared by it. It's really the crux of one of the issues with deportation, and one that has been discussed a lot in academic commentary on the application. I think one of the ways to get around it is very practical. You know, many borders have a no man's land, right? You get to the border, you show your passport, you get into no man's land, you get to the next border post, and then you cross. And I think to start talking about crossing an international border as being that first point of crossing is going to cause a lot of complications legally for jurisdiction over these crimes. And some amicus have already dealt with this by saying it's entry into the next state. And actually the wording of the elements of crime where they say to another state would effectively deal with that. I think we have to be practical about these things. If you're talking about the crimes themselves being committed in no man's land, then that's then that's a different issue. And I think then there's a lot of other jurisdictional factors at play. It depends how many elements of the crime, who the people were, what their nationality was, and therefore territorial jurisdiction might not have such a significant role. I mean, this is really a similar issue with the high seas, and that issue is ordinarily dealt with by, you know, the nationality of the boat, the nationality of the perpetrators. So it really depends on the circumstances. But yeah, absolutely, this is going to be something that they're going to probably have to deal with. Your second question on Myanmar filing a petition. It's an interesting question in terms of process, because there is effectively no process set out under the rules of procedure and evidence. But normally at the preliminary examination, investigation stage, confirmation stage, trial stage, the affected state has the right to make submissions. So I don't see why Myanmar couldn't file a submission in this case. They can only get rejected by the court as being premature, but they are an affected state, and if they wanted to file submissions, I expect that they probably could. On the R2P point, I think you've already covered it, but I just would want to say, in terms of the ICC acting on the notion of R2P, there's just no jurisdictional basis for them to do so. I mean, it's as the Honourable Justice set out, it's really Security Council referral, state party or state referral, and that's it. In terms of the UN not recognising genocide, again, you've already commented on this, but I wanted to add, and I'm a consultant with the UN. I'm not here in my capacity with the UN, and I haven't worked with them while they've been deliberating over this, but I know from experience that proving genocide is a very difficult thing to do. What makes genocide genocide is the special intent of the perpetrator. Yes, there have been loads of acts committed which constitute genocidal acts, and they're not just mass killings, sexual and gender-based violence, it's torture, it's a range of other acts. But to prove that someone had the intent to destroy that group, or in whole or in part, is extremely difficult. And it's something that many prosecutors at the international level have failed to do in circumstances which are not dissimilar from what we're seeing now. So I think there's caution in that respect. I also think, though, and this is going to a point that you made about R2P and genocide, I think I would argue that it's not just genocide that compels states to act, that they should be compelled when it's a crime against humanity. I mean, labelling this as genocide or not, this is, you know, nearly 1 million people being pushed across the border. If states are not going to act on that, then they're not going to act on anything. The roles sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time here, but the role NGOs play, I think there's a lot of things that can be done, and it depends on your expertise and what you can really bring to the collective advocacy that's going on. And I think that's, you know, in the form of, if you have legal expertise, making amicus submissions to the court, making filings to the court, it's one thing that I think can never go to waste is finding creative advocacy strategies with states and pressuring them to do something, pressuring them to act, because that is really where the problem lies at the moment. I would caution telling NGOs to go out and do documentation work. There are many, many, many organisations in Cox's Bazar doing exactly that, stepping over each other to get to the victims. There are some victims that are being interviewed 5, 10, tens of times. And there are repercussions to doing that. Yes, it's good to document the evidence. It's really important that we get that while the evidence is fresh and we don't lose it. But, you know, there's this principle of do no harm and not re-traumatising victims through that process. There is also the problem of having masses of evidence from the same victim which eventually end up in a criminal process before the court. So I saw this in cases I worked on where you would have multiple statements from the same victim, and any discrepancy between those statements can be used to discredit their testimony. And so that in itself was problematic. So unless that's your complete modus operandi, unless that you're an expert in that, then I would really caution against going out and doing that. I'll talk about Bemba because I think probably no one else on the panel will. Yeah, it's great that the court, after many stumbling blocks, finally has a case on sexual and gender-based violence. They've developed some jurisprudence, and that jurisprudence will no doubt be helpful in future cases, particularly for accountability and who should be held accountable. I mean, Bemba wasn't always, you know, a perpetrator of sexual violence, but he's been held accountable as a commander, and I think those links are often hard to make. So there should be some useful lessons and useful jurisprudence in there. I'm going to leave the political questions to Mr. Ruddock.
Fancy that. I think there are only two, and the one that was just addressed by Kate, let me just say, in my judgment, the issue of collecting information that might be used has to be undertaken in a coordinated way. I mean, this is in Bangladesh. I would have thought the government would be in a position in providing access, particularly to Cox's Bazar, to organisations that may be intent on doing that, to coordinate it, to see that it happens in a appropriated, structured way. The information that I had in relation to Bosnia, to give you some idea, the prosecutor's office heard over 10,000 people for the purposes of gathering intelligence on crimes committed. Over 5,000 witnesses testified before the ICT. Why? And in essence, unless you have evidence, you don't get to court. That's the reality. And so I guess I understand the difficulties you raise, and particularly in relation to multiple interviews and the possibility of people getting a story somewhat different and what that might mean. I mean, all of that has to be, I think, understood as one of the difficulties you've got, and even more why, if we're wanting to put pressure on Burma to resolve these issues and the prospect of people being indicted for these sorts of crimes, it needs to be pursued in order to get a better outcome. Now, I don't know how Bangladesh, the government of Bangladesh feels about that, but I think they have to play a role in ensuring that it's done in a structured and coordinated way. In relation to the UN Security Council, I know nothing. I just read. I was reading an article in the Gulf Times. I'm sure you're all readers of the Gulf Times. I read some comments because it was just indicating that the UN Security Council has a role to play. And I think they recognise they have a role. That's why they were here, and that's why they went to Burma. But we need to recognise that, you know, they have 5 permanent members, and unless you've got the 5 permanent members all on side, you don't get an outcome. The other 10 don't matter. It's the 5 permanent members. So you've got to get the United States, Britain, France, and you might get them relatively easily. But you've got to have Russia and China. And in the report I was reading, this was a comment from the Chinese representative. This is a very complicated issue, and it's related with history, with ethnicity, with religions. This was Chinese Deputy UN Ambassador Wu Heitu, asked a question about whether China and Russia were preventing the Council from considering a resolution on Myanmar. There is no easy answer, but if we all work together, I think we can find a way. Well, I think we need to encourage them to find a way. Council is united on travelling to the region. Diplomats said they expect Myanmar ally, China and Russia, both veto-wielding powers on the Council, to resist any push for a stronger Council action, such as sanctions or a referral of the situation to the International Criminal Court. The Russian ambassador: "We don't have a magic solution," he told reporters in response to a question about whether it would consider it without reference. "The issue is still for us to promote bilateral ways to resolve this issue if we try to convince governments to engage in constructive negotiations." So, you know, we're at a point where we know there are hesitancies on China and Russia being involved. It's expressed in the words of their ambassadors. I think that the extent to which we, as part of the international community, can help to persuade them that this is an issue that they need to be involved in, that it can be usefully pursued. Part of the problem is you've got politics being played and people thinking they can get an advantage over one over the other. You know, I mean, I know how these things work, but sometimes when the issues become so important, the politics gets put to one side. We need to make sure that this is one of those issues that is so important that they'll put the politics to one side.
Could I make
This,
an additional point here?
Of course. We'll come back. We'll come back, yeah. Yes, Dr. Mint? The mic, please. Let's go for the second round of questions now.
I'm Lamint, I'm Dr. Lamint. I'm based in Australia. I'm a professor, and I'm an Australian with a Rohingya background. My question is to that, you know, Security Council is paralyzed, okay? So it will take a long time to get a resolution. But in the event of paralysis of Security Council, General Assembly has a upper hand rule. In an exceptional situation, it happens once in 1950 that General Assembly called Uniting for Peace in the event of Korean Civil War, because numbers of people who got slaughtered is in quite horrendous way. Our situation now is no different than what's happened during the Korean Civil War or any other conflict zones. So with the initiatives of Bangladesh is a member of OIC, Organizations of Islamic Conference, and Organization of Islamic Conference itself, can propose this kind of solution. And my question is directly put to Justice Saeed Rifat Ahmed, whether such a kind of precedent is available or whether that kind of evidence can be applied.
Next. Okay. Anyone? I'll come back. I've heard that.
I'm Mohammad
Yes.
Ibrahim Mollik. I'm from sharabangla.net. I'm a reporter of the newspaper. My question is to Kate Benger-Soren. And if we want to let the ICC prosecutors understand that the Myanmar is committing crime against humanity, do you have enough documents that can prove our allegation? And what kinds of documents do we need to present here? And as you worked 40 rights, and you may know well about documentation, because it is discussed that documentation is very important to prove our allegation. Thank you.
Sure. Do we have any more hands? No more? Sure? Okay. Please. Kate, you want to go first?
Thank you. So on documentation, it's an interesting question, and I think a difficult one in this context. Obviously, access. Firstly, I'll talk about the types of documentation. So, you know, there's various different types. I mean, there's going to be documentation on, you know, background documentation on like citizenships and verification cards and things that people have brought with them into Bangladesh, and all of that will be useful. Some of the documentation that's most useful in these types of prosecutions are official documents from government authorities. So in the Yugoslavia context, we relied on a lot of internal official documents that we were able to access largely through law enforcement operations that we were able to carry out because we had state cooperation to a certain extent, and because we had insider witnesses. So those are witnesses that were willing to provide documentation that they had access to because of their role as a government official or a military official or whatnot. That is obviously going to be extremely difficult in this context because, as you know, Myanmar doesn't allow access to investigators, to the UN Special Rapporteur, or to anyone that's trying to document these crimes. So the extent to which that might be available at a later date is unclear as yet. We might be talking a considerable amount of time or not. It just really depends on how the situation pans out. But that being said, it is going to be very important, or can be very important, particularly for proving the responsibility of more senior officials or more senior networks in terms of their accountability when they weren't on the ground and you don't have eyewitnesses that can identify who they were.
Your question tied in completely with the provisions in Article 33(1) of the UN Charter of the range of mechanisms available for passive or peaceful settlement of disputes. Needless to say, Bangladesh is still atop a very high moral ground here as of August in terms of granting sanctuary, albeit declarately, temporarily, to these hundreds of thousands of refugees. But at the end of the day, and I suppose that's the sole purpose of a seminar as this, is that international law is notorious for running low on efficacious or effective mechanisms of enforcement. Very few mechanisms are available. I referred to one such mechanism under the UN Charter, where the UN Security Council can step in under exceptional circumstances. The ICC statute also recognizes the UN Security Council's initiative at this end. So, in terms of enforcing or bringing about change, durable solutions, or I think if you want to resort to international law, then your avenues are fairly limited. It's either the UN Security Council and now this opportunity that has been given us in a platter to invoke the ICC's jurisdiction. But the other avenues, collectively, they can play a role to facilitate a greater adherence to international law by Myanmar, and maybe a facilitator also of a regime change, as it were, in its most favorable sense, as mentioned by our guest of honor. Yes, both avenues can be perceived in tandem, I think.
Philip, we still have one more. Shahidul Alam.
Hi, I'm Shahidul Alam, a photographer and a writer. I work for an independent media organization called DRIC. Thank you very much for organizing it. It was very, very necessary and timely. My concern follows up from what Justice Rifat has just said. Here we are talking about the intricacies and the niceties and the complications of international law. At the end of the day, there are people out there suffering. Their need is now, and something has to be done. You did mention the complications of documentation, and I recognize that. But I think the documentation is not simply because the international legal community needs it. I think people need it. I think the stories need to be told. I think we need somehow to get people on board. And public opinion is something that we've not really talked about, but I think is a powerful equation in this, including when it comes to legal processes, because whether we agree or not, public opinion does exert pressure even upon those structures. I think one of the things that has to happen is we need to be able to sway public opinion in our neighboring countries. These are countries we will have to continue to work with regardless of what happens to the Rohingyas. I think we also need to be able to find ways in which within Myanmar we're able to get some of the information out, because I suspect part of the reason why they're able to get away with this is because of the perceptions that have been created within the country which have nothing to do with reality. And unless we're able to change those things, it'll be quite crucial. Another thing that may have long-term repercussions is the fact that recently Myanmar and Israel have now entered this agreement where they will effectively be doctoring each other's educational material. So we are looking at something that happens here in Bangladesh as well, sadly, where long-term information of the public is manipulated by states in their particular interests. And that, I think, is something that civil society can play a very important role in.
We have one. Oh, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm Phaedra Morris. I'm head of cooperation at the Canadian High Commission and Chargé d'Affaires. I didn't want to speak earlier because I get your point about asking questions, but I did want to emphasize that there are ongoing coordinated efforts on documentation, and it is very important that goodwill and efforts by those who want to engage do not overlap with these. So this point has been made by the panel, but I would really like to emphasize that the re-victimization or re-traumatization of individuals is a strong concern currently, that there are larger efforts, that the report of the fact-finding mission of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights will be coming out this summer with recommendations. And so there is a big difference between testimony and evidence. And so we really have to keep this in mind. Having said that, there is a substantial role for civil society in advocacy, such as my colleague just mentioned. We really need to ensure the story is coming out, and that doesn't have to be individuals, and it doesn't have to be their trauma. We have seen so much of this, but continuing to advocate here in Bangladesh as well as international for accountability, for a response, and for the global community to recognize it's a shared responsibility for the crisis. But I just wanted to emphasize that point. Thanks.
Thank you. We have Mr. Hassan Arif first, former Attorney General.
Thank you, Imtiaz. My actually is not a question. It's more in the nature of comments after listening to the papers presented by two distinguished guests and the observations and comments by Honorable Philip. It appears that if you go at the root of the application, you'll find that the prosecutor has made the application under Regulation 46.3. That means she was aware that Myanmar is not a party to the to the statute, and so what other avenues could be explored to bring Myanmar within jurisdiction of ICC. And it is also significant that she made the request under Article 19, sub-article 3 of the statute, which means that when the prosecutor has evidence, and it is up to her, that she can make a request for a pre-trial chamber ruling as to jurisdiction. And Article 19.3 takes us to Article 13C, which means that one of the party, or which describes a situation where one of the party to the crisis is not a member of the ICC. And then 13C takes us again to Article 15, sub-article 3. It is significant that Article 19, sub-article 3 also makes way for victims to submit observations. The observation that the pre-trial chamber has asked for from Bangladesh. And 15C also has uh, room for victims. So it can be said that the prosecutor was very much conscious about the problems he is going to face in getting a ruling from the ICC over Myanmar's, though she's not a member of the statute, but Bangladesh is. And it has been elaborately dealt with by Justice Rifat in his paper and also by Madam Kate in her presentation. So my feeling is that, and our urge will be to the government not to miss the deadline, as Professor Karim has expressed his anxiety that if the Bangladesh government misses the deadline, what will be the cost? So my observation will be that pursuing bilateral treaty and ICC ruling together with international bodies, including UN Security Council, where we have problem which has been dealt with, that other factors may be intervening factors in using Security Council, the General Assembly, to bring Burmese regime to ensure repatriation are in fact not in conflict with each other, but are modalities for achieving just resolution of Rohingya refugee crisis. We want total repatriation and rehabilitation. Then pursuing all three modes are not derogatory. They are or incompatible to each other. That one, we have to give up one if we pursue one. We can pursue, rather taken together, these modes are more effective in pursuing Burmese regime to repatriation and rehabilitation. News item in several daily journals reported that Parliamentary Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs expressed dissatisfaction about progress of repatriation under the bilateral treaty, and that it has many flaws, and one of such is any time limit. And that means Myanmar has another 100 years for repatriation. The Foreign Ministry is reported to have said that and admitted that international presence is being sought to persuade Burmese regime. The report justifies the move before the ICC that we cannot solely rely on bilateral treaty with Myanmar. The government is urged to submit the affirmative observation to pre-trial Chamber 1 of the ICC. In this respect, it is also important that victims may also make a representation to the ICC under this very rule. To ensure on the ground, it is not enough that they are repatriated. The atmosphere there must be conducive and congenial so that they may go back to an atmosphere where they can live in security, peace, and confidence. To ensure on the ground conducive and congenial situation for safe and secure rehabilitation in Rakhine, it may be explored whether UN peacekeeping forces could be put in place for several years to come, maybe for 10 years or more. And in order to give an atmosphere of congeniality, the PK force may be drawn from SAARC and ASEAN countries. Then local law enforcing agencies may be raised from among Rohingya population, initially under UNPKF and the Burmese government in joint supervision to ensure confidence among the repatriated people. Some organizations need to take up Rohingya victims' participation in the pre-trial chamber jurisdiction ruling, as pointed out by representative of BLAST. There are ample opportunity on the part of NGOs to work on behalf of the victim. And another item, the forced babies. We have read in the newspaper about the forced babies. then construction of homes and shelter for babies in and around Rohingya locality in Rakhine with international financial assistance. Charitable organizations who are running such home and shelter may come forward to maintain and run such homes and shelter. Preferably, those organizations come from ASEAN and SAARC countries. That would ensure ethnic and cultural context close and similar to that of the home. And in respect of what Honorable Philip said about, though it's a harsh word, regime change, that means the process of democratization in Burma may be facilitated by interaction with the Burmese civil society for democratization, deregimentation, and demilitarization of Myanmar. And local Rakhine people must also be taken on board, contributing towards creating a congenial neighborhood in the ground. It is possible initially, maybe through the PKF, and that is important because if the local people think that the Rohingyas have been thrusted upon them, then lasting peace will not be possible. So their participation is necessary so that ultimately the Rohingya get integrated in the Rakhine. And if we go through the history of Arakan, we'll see that the Rohingyas are the son of the soil, because Arakan had Chittagong at some point of time, the monarchy of Arakan, Chittagong, as part of their monarchy kingdom. Then after the Second World War, Arakan was taken by the British, and then when in 1948 Burma was given independence, Arakan was given back to Burma. So it is something like that. If Sylhet goes back to Assam, Assam cannot say that we want the land, but we don't want the people because they are intruder. No, if you take the land, you have to take the people with you. So my feeling is this, that the first and foremost is on the part of the government to respond to the ruling that the ICC has asked for. And we are running short of time. And in order to fill up the gap, BLAST and other organizations may come up for taking the victims' representation and opinion to the ICC. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, please. The mic. Can we have the mic there? Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Eugene Lee. I'm a law student working as a legal intern at BLAST. My question was that if under the principles of UN Charter, the responsibility to hold the country accountable and to deter future acts fall on the two-party states, two affected states, as well as the international community, on whom does the responsibility of rehabilitation for the victims fall under the UN Charter if we are all responsible for right to protection of every individual?
Okay, I guess no more questions. Last minute burning question? No? Okay. Kate, you want to go first? The mic, please.
That's a tough question. The responsibility for, if you're talking rehabilitation, meaning the Rohingya get to return home, go back to their land, have equal rights, that's on Myanmar. It's their territory, they have the responsibility to make that happen. I'm not as familiar with the concept of R2P as I think the Honourable Justice is, and so he might want to comment further on that. But my understanding of R2P is that it is really about the responsibility of states to act when there is such a situation, where there is such to intervene, to stop it, prevent it from happening, and return it to what should be the status quo, and that wouldn't give rise to them having an obligation to rehabilitate the community back in the location where they are. I could be wrong on that, so yeah, but my understanding is that's Myanmar's responsibility. It's their territory.
Yes, the UN agency that immediately comes to mind that has the structural and the legal ability and the mandate to engage in such rehabilitation activities would be the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And it has done so successfully in the past, and there's a glorious example of that having been achieved in the 80s and the 90s through the Comprehensive Plan of Action with regard to Indo-Chinese refugees. Yes, there was initially a status determination, a region-wide status determination process at work, but at the end of the day, there were hundreds and thousands of asylum seekers who were not screened in as refugees entitled to resettlement in third countries. So they had to go back, preferably voluntarily. Many went back involuntarily. However, what was done at the end was the UNHCR, with the cooperation of ASEAN, with Vietnam, of course, and mainly the European Union, worked out a rehabilitation scheme which was sustainable, which was long drawn, but was sustainable to ensure that the returnees would not face persecution and discrimination on return, and that their rehabilitation would effectively lead to reintegration. So, and I think there's a New York Declaration on Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework adopted by the UN General Assembly in September 2016, which, if I'm not mistaken, identifies the UNHCR as the prime agency capable of achieving this under the circumstances.
Philip.
Thank you. My Canadian friend? Is there an address? Is there an address? Well, I wasn't aware that Canada was coordinating the collection of the information of all of the people at Cox's Bazar, and I welcomed the news that I received. I may be naive, I hadn't heard it before, and maybe others hadn't heard it before, and I'm asking for a contact point so we know where to collect the information.
Sorry for the miscommunication. I was saying if there is coordination. So you have through the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the fact-finding mission of which a recommendation structure is going to occur. The work that is
Did you say is going? Did you say is going?
Can you have the mic? Oops.
So those larger organizations and funded organizations are meeting in coordination to ensure that what is looking at the processes that are currently ongoing to see if they would qualify to be considered of the level that would be required. If not, there's discussion on the capacity building that needs to occur for institutions that will and have been looked at to collect information, but that is required before contact with a vulnerable population. So there has been a lot of well-meaning efforts that have occurred that we, at this point as an international community and in discussion with organizations that operate with the community in Cox's Bazar as part of the Rohingya response, are talking for the guidelines that are established. So there are specific guidelines, and you, all of the panel, would be much more aware than I, but that we all are aware of, on contact with such individuals for these processes. So we are highly recommending that those institutions that this is not their area of expertise, of which they do not have the capacity that is deemed to be able to collect and document in a way that would reach international standards, then focus their efforts on advocacy. There are so many gaps in the response in which areas can happen. But the collection of evidence, which is very different than stories and testimonies that could be used for information, we have to be very cautious, and there is broad agreement on this, that this population is one that already is a traumatized one. It is one where women's testimony, and men's, but women's testimony of how they have been systematically abused has been repeated and repeated and written down in different forums, and not in a way that will stand up in a court of law. And so we have to ensure that we look at what will be needed. Accountability is critical. I think everyone is in this room here is in full agreement that accountability is critical. But there are organizations and partners here who this is what keeps us up at night and has since August 25th and before, since October 16th, on how do we ensure that what is collected is done in a way that will stand up in the court of law and not create a re-victimization of a population whose resilience has been amazing, but we should not continue to test.
When I was a minister, and I had bureaucrats like you appearing before me, I would say, you've got a great story, I understand all of the difficulties, and I'm now asking you to find me a way through the mire so that we get an outcome. And the point I was making in my address is that we need to have a determination to get the evidence appropriate for pursuing the prosecutions, and if we don't, we will have failed. And I want to know who is coordinating it, who is pulling it all together to ensure that the difficulties that you and others have identified does not occur. And so I still ask the question, if it's the international community that's doing it, if there's a particular agency that's doing it, that is the coordinating body responsible that's collecting all of the testimony, I'd like to know who they are. Anyway.
I would highly recommend contacting the Office of the Human Rights of the High Commissioner. And just to note, when you mentioned bureaucrats like myself, I can say that Canada's recent announcement of our strategy and our response for Myanmar and Bangladesh to this crisis highlights the ICC, highlights that Canada will be continuing to strongly advocate in this area. I think that does not mean that any of us can rest on our laurels, but I do believe that that this issue is not forgotten, that this issue is on the forefront of many of our international priorities. And so what we can do to contribute to this effort is we welcome your advice as well.
I think we'll talk later. I go to the point. There may be the appropriate international agency. I think everybody needs to walk out of this room saying they know who they're going to talk to provide the information that they are collecting, because they're well-meaning, they are concerned, they want to know. Can I just deal with the other issues that really came through in relation to the two questions that we received, which I think were related in relation to returns? The issue of return is particularly difficult. When I was sitting down with people yesterday at Cox's Bazaar, they were telling me of what they left. And what they left is not what is there now. Their homes have been destroyed, their farms have been lost to them, others have acquired them, and the expectation that people will be able to go home and rebuild their lives in those circumstances is particularly difficult. And yet I know the Rohingya want to be able to go home, that is their desire, but they wish to be able to do so in situations of safety and security and dignity, and when they can get access to what was theirs. Now, I don't know how we're going to get there. I think it has become particularly difficult. But when you know that the people at Cox's Bazaar, and we're talking of in excess of 1 million people in a very confined area where they cannot survive long term, there has to be a solution. And unless you're going to dedicate substantial areas of Bangladesh that have not been occupied to enable people to start farms and create businesses and generate new lives, it's not going to work. You can't just leave them as they are in terms of all of the information that's been given to me about the nature of the site that they are now in, particularly with the seasonal changes that you know far more about than I do. I was very familiar with the Comprehensive Plan of Action. The minister who implemented it in Australia did so because we had reached a point where we were taking everybody who got on a boat from Vietnam. The numbers were impossible to get resettled because they were in Hong Kong, they were in Indonesia, they were in Malaysia, Philippine, I went there. And in the end, if you were going to get it resolved, there had to be a plan of action to sort out who were really refugees, and 90% weren't. 90% weren't. If I can tell you a story, I went to see that when people returned to Vietnam, they went back with safety and dignity. I wanted to satisfy myself that that was in fact occurring. And I can tell you this story. I went into the port city of Haiphong to meet a young man who had left on a boat for Hong Kong with his wife, and the child was left with their grandparents. They didn't want to take the child on the boat, so mum and dad looked after their grandchild. That's fine. Who was dad? He was the director of a local business, the president of the local branch of the Communist Party, living in a lovely mansion where the grandchild was being looked after, but the son and daughter-in-law wanted to go to the United States to start a new life. And the view was they could go home with safety, and they obviously could. But that's not what we're talking about. A comprehensive plan of action implemented by the UN will probably find that 99% of these people are genuinely refugees. That's what I suspect. And so the difficulty is that if you've got no place for them to stay, no place where they can go elsewhere and be resettled. I haven't heard the international community bowling up and saying we're going to take 1 million people. Thank you very much. The circumstances have to be created where they're able to go home in safety, in dignity, with their property secured, with future governance arrangements. I think there may be a need for an international peacekeeping force. I mean, I've seen those forces in other parts of the world. They can work modestly. I think you need to have governance arrangements, particularly with policing, that involves the whole community, and that means that if you're in Rakhine State, you would have a reasonable number of Rohingya police, along with others, to ensure people's safety and security. I mean, there are a lot of things that have to be thought through. I don't pretend to be on top of what it is that you would need to do, but I know it is extraordinarily difficult and demanding. But I think, and I hope, that all of the pressure that can be created by looking at the prospects of holding the people who've done this accountable through the international judicial system, coupled with the other pressure that we can put on states, will produce an outcome where people can go home in safety and rebuild their lives. And I was asking this question: what is being spent now by the international community in Cox's Bazar? And how much more would you need to put in place to fund returns, resettlement, and to provide reasonable security? And I suspect that probably the difference may be not as significant as you would think. But the outcome needs to be one that the international community presses for and seeks to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, I think we have, I'm sorry, don't have the time, run of time, but you can, on individual basis probably after this event, you can talk to some of the speakers. As a moderator, just a couple of things I want to flag so that we keep certain things in perspective. One thing is clear, listening to the three speakers, that the legal issue is critical, but then there is more than legal issues. There are political issues, there are issues of economic issues, not to mention the issue of morality and ethics. That should not be in any way undermined or discouraged, because a modern state gets reproduced on the basis of morality and ethics. If there is no morality and ethics, the state collapses. So, yes, the legal issue is vital, and I think this particular session that we had clearly you can see the difficulties that will be there, but I think there are enough, what I would say, minds which can work, which would make Myanmar accountable. The second issue that I want to focus on bringing Myanmar, the focus ought to be Myanmar. I think that is what I sometimes get worried. The focus is increasingly, on the Rohingya refugees and then on Bangladesh. The focus ought to be Myanmar. And when I say focus ought to be on Myanmar, we would know that they are serious in repatriation the moment they change certain rules and bring new laws, either through bills or through presidential statement in some form. If that is not there, then I think this very discussion, and I've been saying to our government from day one, that are they talking about new laws? If they're not talking about new laws, then it's not going to work. Simple as that. Now that brings to the issue of bilateralism and the issue of multilateralism or this international, the exercise that we hopefully will be facing. And from day one, I've been saying again that bilateralism, one can understand why the government is working on bilateralism, and I have no problems with that. But the issue is different from the 70s and the 90s. This is not the first time that we have the Rohingya exodus. We had in the 70s and 90s. Myself was involved very much in the 90s. This one is different because there is enough credible evidence that a genocide or crime against humanity or ethnic cleansing took place this time. This evidence was lacking in the 70s and the 90s. And those who are worried about the evidence, I can only say, from day one, the government and its agencies were absolutely conscious of this issue of evidence. And you will get that by the very fact that this time each and every member has been digitalized. It's a record, it's something, a data set to see. When they arrived, how they arrived, in what condition they arrived, in which village they arrived, what is the neighborhood, is there. So, this is not the 70s and the 90s. Now, and I've been telling also to the government that even if you resolve this issue bilaterally tomorrow, even if they go back, the issue of crime against humanity and genocide, ethnic cleansing will not go away. That's the issue. It has nothing to do with Bangladesh and Myanmar this time. It has to do with certain groups in the military and their collaborators committing crime against humanity or genocide and ethnic. That's the issue. It has nothing to do with Myanmar. I have a good number of friends in Myanmar. I've been meeting them in Bangkok. I've recently met them in Beijing. I'm meeting them in several places, and they all agree. So it's not the whole of Myanmar. There are people, even in Myanmar, who understands what has been done cannot reproduce the Myanmar state. And they need to go back to their own civilization. Each and every state has, gets reproduced because of their civilizational strength. The civilizational strength that Myanmar had is no longer there. That's the issue. So they are also, puzzled by this whole issue. So the point is, you can solve it bilateralism, and you can easily see that how they have changed from day one. If you keep track, and as we have been keeping track from day one, and you have seen day before yesterday in the Shangri-La dialogue, the National Security Advisor saying, we'll take back all 700,000. Look at the changes. Because they can feel the pressure that is coming up. But this pressure ought to be built. The focus ought to be Myanmar. That's the issue. Because an archetype has developed in Myanmar of fear, of anger, of vengeance over the years. It's not just yesterday. Over the years, in fact. And you can see, from the 60s onwards, 62, altogether. And you can, literally point out, there are enough number of books that have come up narrating that particular story. Philip has rightly pointed out about the issue of sanctions. Some of our government officials have been also openly talking about that sanctions is one way of building pressure. Now let's take China, for example. Nobody talked about India, though, for some reason. That was quite interesting. But you can see India has also changed. It's now talking openly that ought to be a solution. I think the policymakers, and I talk this on a personal level, policymakers of Narendra Modi failed him this time. He could have emerged as a world leader. They literally failed him. Because Delhi has an excellent relationship with Bangladesh. I wish Tariq Karim was here because he was the High Commissioner working on this very hard. And they also have a very good relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi. Delhi was in a position to bring both of them, but they tried to compete with China. How can you do that financially, economically at this point? And now they understood that Myanmar is now more dependent on China than it was before. That's, I would say, the failure. And there are a good number of friends I have in MEA, and I told them flatly that you have failed Narendra Modi. Now bring on China. The very fact, and this is, I think somebody, I think Philip pointed out on the Belt Road Initiative, the very fact that they have a Belt Road Initiative will actually bring them to the point of pressurizing Myanmar. Because you cannot have an investment of that scale. It's a huge investment, not to mention also in Bangladesh, but also in Myanmar, of a kind, to a state where the international community is saying that it has committed genocide, a crime against humanity, etc., etc. So the very fact that they have this One Belt, One Road initiative, it's only that how they operate a bit differently. Yes, they have been putting all the restrictions at the UN. But the moment the foreign minister of China comes to Dhaka and goes to Yangon, says we have a three-phase strategy. The first phase is to cessation of hostility. You may debate on that. Second is repatriation. Third, go into the root cause and solve the problem once and for all. Look at the three-phase and look at Kofi Annan Commission's report and look at our Prime Minister's 5-point approach. There's a consensus on that. So I would think that we need to work on that, and I've been telling our government, the PM should visit both Delhi and Beijing more frequently. and particularly on this issue. I hope that will come in the future. But the fact that we have the political and the geopolitics involved, one can easily see that we need to work hard. I don't think it's 2 permanent members there. I think it's in 1. Russia is just behind China. It's not 2 members opposing, it's only 1. If one says yes, I'm sure Putin will also join in. But on that also, I think one of my suggestions would be that the Bangladesh government should invite Mr. Putin to visit Dhaka. That can change things as well. The UN General Assembly is an approach that has been highlighted several times by many important people. Yes, ICC would be one, key domain that we'll be looking at, but I'm sure Bangladesh government would be working very seriously on the General Assembly. Finally, at the end of the day, Bangladesh, as you know, in 71 faced a genocide and had 10 million refugees. This is a country which cannot stop refugees coming in. Can never do that. And in last 6 months, I think you have seen that literally you have more than Bhutan, literally more than Bhutan getting established inside Bangladesh. Well, Bhutan's population is less than 800,000. We have 1.1 million people. But Bhutan took 50,000 years to become Bhutan. This got established only in 3 months. But I would request those who have not visited, please go and visit. You will see that the Bangladeshis, both the GEO and the NGO partnership, we have the, what you call, in terms of disaster management, I think we have the finest non-governmental domain. And we can be proud of that. And it has worked absolutely superb. And there are people who have been working tirelessly there, made something which is something to see. But as all the speakers have pointed out, it cannot continue forever. It has to come to an end. Now, so at the end of the day, when we look into this whole issue of Rohingya refugees, I believe it's an issue that should be looked at, that what each individual can do personally. Those who are in the government can do in one way. Those who are in civil society can do it. Those in the media can do. I've been telling the media all this, please don't focus Bangladesh. You need to focus Myanmar. Try to get as much information from Myanmar. Who were the people involved? We already know some of the, military officers. Why don't you, flag them? Put their pictures on. But somehow, I'm not trying to say I'm critical of media, but the media gaze is always Bangladesh. There has to be a critical gaze, a serious gaze of the media on Myanmar. So each and every individual, I think there was a question that what NGOs can do. X number of things. It's an issue, as I said, it's an issue of how do you reproduce yourself and the civilization together. And once we get that understanding, we can see the legality, the politics, the economics, morality, all are, involved and all are important. With that few, words, let me thank all of you, but we have an official vote of thanks. And let me now welcome, Farah, the co-sponsor, co-organizer of this particular event. Farah, please, for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Imtiaz. It's the guest of honor, Mr. Philippe Ruddock, our special guest, Honorable Justice Rifat Ahmed, who I prefer to call my friend Rifat, but anyway, formalities. Ms. Kate Winners Warren, our respected colleague and counterparts, fellow guests, everyone who is here, thank you very much. On behalf of the 3 organizations, Mr. Manzoor Hassan, OBE, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, and ActionAid Bangladesh. It is a privilege for me to present the vote of thanks. But being an activist, I'm not going to be too structured. The whole reason for all of us coming together is the voices of the people and the oppression and the violation that we have seen and that is still continuing. The legal matters are very complex. I'm leaving this room with a lot of questions, and I'm not sure I've fully appreciated and understood how this process of ICC and all the geopolitics is going to resolve the Rohingya crisis in the near future. Because what I read from all that is being said, it's going to be a very long, dragged process. Because we are talking about vested interests, we're talking about politics, and so on. But we are talking about people. And we must at least put that at the center of whatever we are considering. Whether it is the ICC option, whether it is the government of Bangladesh taking this up, whether the international community is going to take this up, we are talking about women, men, children, and their future, their existence. Future is pretty, far away. It's about today. And I don't have a lot of hope, given that what's happening in Palestine, while the rest of the world is looking on, given what has happened in Syria, I'm not leaving with a lot of hope. My only hope is how resistant and resilient the people are. When I went to the camps in August and when I go back now, I see a difference. And the difference is coming from the resilience of the people in the camps, their desire to continue to live. I mean, you must be in a very dire condition, in the worst condition to flee to Bangladesh, which is not a poor, rich and developed country, to live in those camps. But they still think it's a better option because they received a certain amount of dignity and they felt secured. So what next? Because we have 100,000 children being born, all the crimes that have been committed. And from the conversations today, what I have concern is about impunity. The international community has provided impunity over and over and over again. So what's going to change? We're still talking about geopolitics and political economy. So what's going to change? So this is what I'm taking back from here. And I think as people, we want to keep the stories going. We want this to be on the agenda. And we urge the government of Bangladesh to make that submission by the deadline. That does, many speakers before me have said, it has no impact on the bilateralism. That should continue. And so should the international pressure. We all have to come together. There are technicalities about collecting evidence, testimonies, I understand, but nothing stops us from taking the stories and putting it on the global platform, on everybody's agenda, and reminding us that today, right now, it's still happening. There are lots of international, national stakeholders. We will all put our efforts together. Some of it will be within the structure and the framework, some of it may not be. But please remember that somehow a narrative was created which the Myanmar citizens bought and believe in, and that is why it could happen. And it has happened to us in Bangladesh. We know how the narrative was created and the West Pakistanis, how they committed the genocide. So we can't forget that. So the narrative needs to have a counter narrative, and that's why we are a part of this process. The three organizations held the conference in April. We had the Dhaka Declaration, and as a follow-up, we have organized this seminar. We hope that together we can create a certain amount of interest and pressure on the government to make the submission, and there's no stopping us from making a submission. Because, and as we have heard, even the victims can make a submission. So I will just end by saying, they are human beings we are working with. While all this legality and the I's and the T's get cut and put in place. So let's be with them and let's try and keep our advocacy going. There is an exhibition from a people's perspective, from the lens of a Bangladeshi photographer Mahmood out there. I would welcome you to see that. I'm sure Shahidul Alam has many such exhibitions going on. Let us see and let us all work together to bring that change. We can't accept this in this day and age. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the end of the international seminar. I would request Ms. Farah Kabir ma'am to present our distinguished guests with a small token of thanks on behalf of the organizers.
আমাদের মিডিয়ার ভাই বোনেরা, আপনারা যদি আমাদের সঙ্গে এরপরে কথা বলতে চান, আমরা এখানে আছি। আজকের আলোচনার মূল বক্তব্য ছিল যে আমরা আমাদের সরকারকে অনুরোধ করব তারা সময় মতো যেন এই সাবমিশনটা দেয় এবং আন্তর্জাতিক যেই চাপটা দরকার সেই জায়গা থেকে তারা যেন আইসিসির কাছে যায় এবং মিয়ানমারের সঙ্গে বসে যদি সমাধান করতে পারে তাতে তো কোনো অসুবিধা নাই, দুইটা প্রক্রিয়া একসঙ্গে চলতে পারে। কিন্তু বিশেষ যে জিনিসটা আমাদের সবার মনে রাখতে হবে, এতগুলো মানুষ ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছে, অন্যায় হয়েছে, ধর্ষণ হয়েছে, খুন হয়েছে, এটা ভুলে যাওয়ার কোনো উপায় নাই। এবং যদি দ্বিপাক্ষিক বা বাইল্যাটারালি এটা সমাধান হয়েও যায়, ওই বিষয়গুলোকে আমরা কি করব? ওই বিষয়গুলোকে আমরা কোথায় নিয়ে যাব? আমরা কি ভুলে যাব যে মেয়েদের উপরে ধর্ষণ হয়েছে? আমরা কি ভুলে যাব যে আমাদের নারীদেরকে ধর্ষণ করার পরে তারা এখানে এসে সন্তান জন্ম দিচ্ছে? এটা তো আমরা ভুলে যেতে পারি না। যেই শিশুর প্রতি অত্যাচার করা হচ্ছে সেটা তো আমরা ভুলে যেতে পারি না। তাই যদি হয় দ্বিপাক্ষিক পদ্ধতি বা দ্বিপাক্ষিক যে ব্যবস্থা আছে সেটা চলবে। আন্তর্জাতিকভাবেও আমরা এই জায়গাতে আমরা আশা করি যে বাংলাদেশের সরকার 11ই জুনের আগেই তারা এই সাবমিশনটা দেবে এবং আইসিসির ক্ষমতা যতটুকু আছে সেই ক্ষমতা ব্যবহার করে জবাবদিহিতার জন্য কাজ করবে। কেন মিয়ানমার এবং তার রাষ্ট্রের মধ্যে যেই সব সংস্থা বা মানুষ এই অন্যায় করেছে তাকে কোথাও না কোথাও জবাবদিহিতা করতে হবে, এর বাইরে কিন্তু কথা বলার সুযোগ নেই। আর আজকে আমরা যদি নিজেদেরকে একটা সভ্য পৃথিবী হিসাবে মনে করি, আমরা কি করে এখানে চোখ বন্ধ করে বসে থাকব? আমরা কি করে না এগিয়ে আমরা এখানে বসে থাকতে পারবো? আমার মনে হয় জবাবদিহিতার কথাটা আপনারা সবাই জানেন, আপনারা সবাই বিশ্বাস করেন এবং মিডিয়ার যে ভূমিকা সেটা হলো মিয়ানমারের উপরে এখন দৃষ্টিটা দিতে হবে। মিয়ানমারের সরকারের জবাবদিহিতার জন্যে কাজ করতে হবে। আন্তর্জাতিক মিডিয়া যদি না করে, আমার দেশের মিডিয়া তো করতে পারবে। আপনারা সোশ্যাল মিডিয়া ব্যবহার করেন, আপনারা চ্যানেল ব্যবহার করেন, পত্রপত্রিকা ব্যবহার করেন, যে মিয়ানমারের সরকারের জবাবদিহিতা কোথায়। আর কতদিন আমরা বলবো যে আজকে চায়নার সম্পর্ক, ইন্ডিয়ার সম্পর্ক, রাশিয়ার সম্পর্ক, মাঝখান দিয়ে মানুষ মরে যাচ্ছে, ধর্ষিত হচ্ছে, শেষ পর্যন্ত হারিয়ে যাচ্ছে।
I'll just take 2 minutes. কয়েকটা জিনিস যে তিন বিশিষ্ট আমাদের ব্যক্তিত্ব যারা এখানে আসলেন, মিস্টার ফিলিপ রাডক, দেন কেট বেগনিশরণ এবং জাস্টিস রিফাত, তাদের মধ্যে একটা বড় কনসেনসাস আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে তারা বলছে যে মিয়ানমারকে তার যেই অত্যাচার রোহিঙ্গাদের উপর করেছে সেটার জবাবদিহিতা সামনে আনতে হবে। বিশেষ করে আইসিসির যেই সাবমিশন বাংলাদেশ সরকারকে রিকোয়েস্ট করেছে এবং একটা ডেডলাইনও আছে 11ই জুনের মধ্যে, এবং তারা মোটামুটি আমি মনে করি যে আলোচনার মধ্যে একটা স্পষ্ট জিনিস এসেছে যে সাবমিশনের ব্যাপারে বাংলাদেশ সরকার যেন পজিটিভ একটা রিপ্লাই দেয়। এখন অনেকেই বলছে যে যেহেতু বাংলাদেশ সরকার দ্বিপাক্ষীয় একটা সম্পর্ক তৈরি করছে সেটা বুঝি সেটা হয়তো ব্যাহত হতে পারে, বা যেহেতু বাংলাদেশের সাথে এই অঞ্চলে একাধিক দেশের সাথে সম্পর্ক আছে, সেই দেশগুলো হয়তো মিয়ানমারের প্রতি তাদের এক ধরনের দুর্বলতা আছে, সেখানে হয়তো আমাদের একটা সমস্যা হতে পারে। তবে আমরা যা শুনলাম তাতে বোঝা গেল যে দ্বিপাক্ষীয় যেই সম্পর্ক সেটা যে আলোচনা হচ্ছে সেই আলোচনা বজায় থাকতে পারে। সেটার সাথে এই আইসিসির যে সাবমিশন যেটা বলা হচ্ছে যে তারা যে ক্রাইম এগেনস্ট হিউম্যানিটি করেছে কিনা বা কোনো জেনোসাইড হয়েছে কিনা সেটার সাথে এক করার কোনো প্রয়োজন নেই, দুটো আলাদাভাবেই যেতে পারে। এবং এখানে যারা ভিকটিম, যারা একেবারে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছে তারাও কিন্তু সাবমিশন করতে পারে। এবং এমনকি বাংলাদেশেরও একাধিক সংগঠন অলরেডি তারা কাজ করছে এই ব্যাপারে। তো আমরা এই আলোচনায় যেটা আমরা দেখলাম সারাদিন, যে হ্যাঁ একটা আইনগত অনেকগুলো বিষয় আছে, জটিলতা আছে, কোনো সন্দেহ নেই, সেগুলো আমাদের বোঝার বিষয় আছে। তবে আইনের প্রক্রিয়া যেভাবে আমাদের চালিয়ে যেতে হবে, ঠিক একইভাবে আমাদের রাজনৈতিক, অর্থনৈতিক এবং বিভিন্ন যেই ক্ষেত্রগুলো আছে মানবিক, সবগুলোই আমাদের কাজ করতে হবে। যার জন্য কাজ বড় আকারে পড়ে আছে। মনে রাখতে হবে যে ছোটোখাটো একটা ভুটান তৈরি হয়েছে বাংলাদেশের মধ্যে 3 মাসের মধ্যে, এবং ভুটানের চেয়ে বড়। যদি আমি জনগণের সংখ্যা যদি দেখি, সংখ্যা দিয়ে ভুটানের চেয়ে বেশি সংখ্যা এই 3 মাসে বাংলাদেশের মধ্যে বসবাস করছে। যার জন্য কাজটা বড়। তবে যেহেতু আমাদের 71-এর একটা অভিজ্ঞতা আছে, সেই 71 আমাদের রাষ্ট্রের একটা একেবারে যাকে বলা হয় একটা অংশ, সেই হিসাবে আমি এবং আমার যারা সহকর্মী আছেন আমরা সবাই বিশ্বাস করছি যে এই রোহিঙ্গা সমস্যা আমরা যদি আন্তর্জাতিক প্রেশারটা যদি বাড়াতে পারি আরও বড় আকারে, আমাদের বিশ্বাস যে মিয়ানমারের জনগণও একসময় বুঝতে পারবে এবং তারাও তাদের জনগণের, তাদের সরকারের উপরেও একটা প্রেশার আনতে পারবে। এবং তখন হয়তো আমরা দেখব যে আজকের যেই ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত যে রোহিঙ্গারা আছেন তাদের শরণার্থী যে অবস্থা আছেন সেটা থেকে তারা মুক্তি পাবেন। মিস্টার ফিলিপ রাডাক খুব স্পষ্টই বলেছেন যে আমাদের স্যাংশনে ফিরে যেতে হবে। মনে রাখতে হবে যে মিয়ানমার কিন্তু একসময় স্যাংশনের দ্বারা আবদ্ধ ছিল, কিন্তু গণতন্ত্রের একটা আভাস দিয়ে সেই স্যাংশনগুলো সরিয়ে ফেলতে পেরেছে। তবে আমরা দেখেছি যে মিয়ানমারের গণতন্ত্র আসলেই গণতন্ত্র যেইভাবে বলে সেটা না। সেখানে 1/3 সামরিক বাহিনীর উপস্থিতি আছে এবং দেখা যাচ্ছে যে সামরিক বাহিনী পুরো রাষ্ট্রটাকে চালাচ্ছে। তো সেই জায়গায় মিস্টার ফিলিপ রাডাক উনিও বলছেন এবং একাধিক আমি মনে করি ব্যক্তি বলছেন, আমরাও বলছি যে স্যাংশনটা আবার চালু করা দরকার। এবং উদাহরণস্বরূপ উনি এটাও বলেছেন যে যেহেতু ইরান বা নর্থ কোরিয়া এইসব দেশেও আমরা দেখেছি যে এক ধরনের স্যাংশনের দ্বারা মাধ্যমে কতগুলো জিনিস সমাধান হয়েছে বা সমাধান হতে যাচ্ছে, মিয়ানমারের ব্যাপারেও ব্যতিক্রম কোনো ব্যাপার না। যার জন্য মিয়ানমারে কিছুই করা যাবে না, সেই জায়গা থেকে আমি মনে করছি যে এখন আন্তর্জাতিক মহলে এই স্যাংশনের দাবিটাও বড় আকার করে আসছে। হ্যাঁ,
এ বিষয়ে কিছু দূর আলোচনা হয়েছে এখানে, কিছুটা আলোচনা হয়েছে। তবে এই ডকুমেন্টেশন একটা প্রচেষ্টা বা প্রয়াস চলছে এবং কিছু গাইডলাইন্স বা টার্মস অফ রেফারেন্স তৈরির পথে রয়েছে এবং এটা একটা স্ট্রাকচার বা একটা ফ্রেমওয়ার্কের আওতায় আনার একটা প্রচেষ্টা চলছে। তবে এটার মধ্যে আমাদের সবারই সম্মতি রয়েছে যে এই এভিডেন্স এখন জোগাড় করা, রেকর্ড করার সময় এসে গেছে। অবশ্যই অবশ্যই যখন আইনি প্রক্রিয়ায় যাচ্ছি আমরা তখন এই এভিডেন্সটা দরকার হবে। একটা মিনিট, হ্যাঁ। How will the collection of evidence help in the dispensation? Collection of reliable evidence.